So I'm really excited because the reason I wrote this book is because I was encountering a lot of the same problems that you guys encounter and what you're expressing in the poll. And it was interesting because I actually learned a lot of my initial lessons about differentiation by taking acting classes in my 20s. And I would show up at auditions, and of course, this is what it looked like, right? I mean, at a distance, we all were just part of the pack, and there was no way for any of us to stand out. And in the meantime, after helping to build a phenomenal business within Accenture, I went off on my own to start my own firm, and I started running into the same problems that I was seeing a lot of my clients run into, which is, looking and sounding like everybody else. And in the meantime, I was having a phone conversation with a friend of mine one day, and she said, Theresa, you wouldn't believe this, but so and so is actually making $50,000 a day doing almost exactly what we're doing. And she's got less experience than us, and hasn't had nearly the track record, yada yada. And it really made me stop and think, what is it that certain companies do? How is it that certain ones stand out in their markets as the clear leader, and they can command super high prices while everybody else struggles to get business? And this was the fundamental question I set about to try to answer. And so I did a lot of research. I interviewed hundreds of executives. I studied companies, and I started realizing that the fundamental problem is everybody just hangs out their shingle, and they go into business and they think, oh, we're so unique, our product is so distinctive, we have all these fabulous functions and features, and yet in a crowded space, stepping back at a distance, just like that audition line, everybody looks and sounds the same. So there's no clear, sustainable differentiation. So we might be very different coming out of the gate, but it's very hard to sustain that differentiation. And the MarTech space is a great example. In 2011, there were 150 companies across the entire landscape. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with this graphic that gets put out every year, but there's a guy who puts this together. And by 2018, there were over 7,000 players in the space. And you can see what you look like at a distance when you're in a crowded space. We've seen this happen in analytics, in artificial intelligence, in blockchain, you name the space, IoT, the list just goes on. Every single space faces this basic problem. And what happens is it's just raw economics. So as competition enters the space, if demand hasn't changed relative to market demand, your prices are going to go down. The more competitors there are, without clear differentiation, you're eventually forced to compete on price. And I know a lot of you can probably relate, but what happens then, if you're not differentiated, you scratch and claw for business, and you watch your prices go down, and eventually you're going to go out of business. It's not a matter of, are you going to go out of business? It's a matter of how long is it going to take? It's either going to be a fast death or a slow death. And with COVID, we've really seen this. So the companies that weren't clearly differentiated, a lot of them have really struggled. So then the question becomes, what do we do about it? How do you solve this problem? Now, I know those of you in product management are, well, actually, before I go any further, I'm just curious, can you guys relate, or is anybody facing this right now? Just put it in the chat. I'm just curious as to who's actively, I know in the poll, I see that there were people who are facing some of these very issues, but so I see Rajesh said absolutely. Is anybody else dealing with any of this right now? Just put it up in the chat there. Nobody else is facing any differentiation challenges? And you can, yes, Steve said yes, Cam, fintech space, very crowded. Fintech is crazy crowded, with companies being added by the day. Manuel said yes. So yeah, so a lot of people can relate to this. So what I started realizing through my research is that you really have to aim to be the go-to in your space. That being an also ran is just not going to be enough to sustain you over time. So, what does that really mean to be the go-to? Well, first of all, you're the first name that comes to mind in your space for a particular market problem. Customers actively seek you out. You're not having to scratch and claw to get their attention. Nobody else can deliver on the market problem like you can. You really are superior at what you do, and your stellar reputation precedes you. And then you rarely, if ever, have to compete for business. You really have things quite locked up in terms of mind share and in terms of the market, and you can name your price. You can declare what it is you're going to charge without having to worry about that. And then you're also viewed by employees and by partners and by other stakeholders as the best, and somebody that the best who want to work with the best are attracted to. So that's effectively what a go-to is. And so this is sort of the holy grail that we all want to aim for. And I started realizing in the research that the companies that really last and that really are able to name their price over time fit these criteria. So then the question becomes, what is the fundamental strategy? And actually, before we even do that, I'm curious, what are some other go-to companies that you think of or that are in your space? Are there any companies that you actually would like to emulate, that you've run across as competitors, or companies that pop into mind that you think of as being go-tos? Just put it in the chat. So Spotify, Slack. Yep. If you talk about inter-office collaboration, Slack is probably the first name that comes to mind. Certainly Google, especially in certain spaces. Stripe, Zoom for sure right now. Now the question, and we can examine this later on, after you see what's involved in becoming and remaining the go-to, we can talk about how Zoom is positioned. And here's a goal: want to be the first brand name known to clinicians. So we have to build intelligent systems embedded in their workflow to be used for free. That's from when. Okay, well, let's talk about what the strategy is. So fundamentally, you choose an urgent, critical market problem that you're going to own, and you offer a unique solution, and you make it so focused and effective that you become known as the only one to go to for that issue. And then you deliver such high value that, number one, you set the market agenda. You decide what direction things are going in for that market. The right prospects actively seek you out. You're not having to go out and drum up so much business. They're coming to you. And then you're getting paid very well for the value you're delivering. So there's a value focus as opposed to a pure price focus. So that's fundamentally what we're trying to accomplish. And if you succeed at this, what happens is that even as the market is filling up, your margins grow over time even as other people are watching their margins drop. So we've seen this with many companies over time, and we'll talk about some examples as we get further into the presentation. But this is the big benefit. And it's interesting because when I talk to companies, when I go out and meet with them, even the CEOs, I don't hear enough of a fixation on margins, gross margins. And these are so critical to growth, because that's what funds your R&D, your product development, your marketing investments, and so forth. So I hear a lot of focus, especially in Silicon Valley, on revenue, not enough on gross margins. So I really hope that you will get fixated on this. And it's interesting, I'm working with a client right now. They can't even tell me what their gross margins are. They don't even track it. So, this is super, super crucial. And if you walk away with one thing tonight, I hope it will be that obsession over gross margins, because that's your driving goal. So a great example of somebody who's, I'm going to talk about what I call the Apollo method for market dominance in a few minutes, and a company that has by default or by definition just been a textbook case of this in action is Salesforce. They've just done everything right over these last 20 years that they've been in existence. And I can talk about some ways in which that's happening, but they are a great example. They came into Alok, I can answer that in a few minutes about market share. And Jim, I can talk about the net profit versus gross margin issue in a few minutes too. We can come back to that. So with Salesforce, they came into a very crowded market with a clear dominant leader, which was Siebel. And many of you at this point may not even have heard of Siebel because they got absorbed into Oracle after having financial difficulties. And so Salesforce has just done a beautiful job of doing everything right, at least to this point, and entering a crowded space, but in a very careful way and in a very specific way, and then dominating that space. So the question is how do you implement this strategy? What's involved and how do you break it down? Now, I know that that you all are product managers and by definition, program and project managers. And so you fully appreciate the benefits of taking, instead of having just a pile of pieces and things to do and tasks, when you organize them in a meaningful way and you have a structured approach, magical things can happen. So if we take all the different pieces, and many people approach their strategy as just a bunch of pieces of Legos laying on the floor, and they kind of implement this and that and this and that without a clear structured approach. And look what can happen, of course. So just like the magic we get, here's a working car, actually, that's built out of Legos, which is a fun example. But just like we have with Legos, we can with our strategy. And when I was trying to figure out what is the recipe for how you become the go-to, I went back and reverse engineered what we had done with the business unit at Accenture that I helped start. We were focused on the telecommunications industry, and at the time we were an outsider. At the time there were dominant players already in place. We really were in an uphill battle. So I really wanted to figure out, what did we do right? And then interestingly, I also started noticing, having grown up in Apollo space program territory and NASA territory with lots of friends whose parents actually worked on the Apollo space program, I started noticing some parallels in what it took to put a man on the moon and what it takes to become a go-to. And for that reason, I named the methodology the Apollo method for market dominance. There are 4 stages to this methodology. And what I'm going to do is do a quick walkthrough of each of the 4 stages with just highlights of what it takes to implement these. But like anything else, the devil is in the details. And that's why I decided to write an entire book to document everything you need to do. And I wrote the book so that you can go off and do it without help from me. It's not a marketing piece aimed at sucking you into buying services from me or training or any of that. And Jim, yes, I will address that in a moment, because yes, many people think of the launch as coming after the ignition. But there's a reason why it is the way it is. And so what I'll do is walk you through the high level, but the details are in the book, and you can read the book and walk away with everything you need to start implementing. And I actually also have worksheets in there to help you do a quick and dirty version, because any bit of implementation of even pieces of the methodology can make a big, big difference in your business versus what people typically do today. So with launch, the first thing that you need to do is figure out, articulate a vision for the market. So many people will articulate a vision for their business, but you need a vision for the marketplace and where things are going, because instead of just focusing on a product and being a solution looking for a problem, you start with the market problem and figure out, what market problem do we want to own, and what is our unique approach going to be to solving that problem? So this is your moonshot. So this is where you say, this is what we want to be known for. This is the problem. We want everybody to associate with us, and we're going to take intellectual ownership for this problem in the market. And we're going to drive the market forward around what needs to be done about this problem, not just around our product, but the problem itself, and thought leadership around the issue and the trends that are driving the issue or could impact the issue. And then developing a point of view about that problem. So notice we haven't started talking about you at all yet. It's what's the problem in the market and what's our point of view on what needs to be done about that problem. So you identify what it's going to be, what your point of view is, and then you define a unique approach to solving that problem. So once you do this, you launch this into the market. Now, you don't necessarily have to have it figured out yet. You don't have to have the product built or operationalized. And there are reasons why you can get away with this as you're starting to look at it. But some of you already have a product and you need to maybe back up and wrap and figure out this piece to go with what it is you're trying to do in the marketplace. But what you want to do is put it out there in the market and you plant your flag and say, we are going to own this problem. Now, take a screenshot really quickly because we're going to go into breakout groups in just a minute. And you may want to refer back to this. So everybody just snap a screenshot real fast so you have it. Okay, so let's look at the space program. The Russians in the late 50s, the US and the Russians were in this incremental space race. So think of your space race with functions and features. Many of you have a functions and features space race going on in your market. And finally, the Russians were kicking our butt. Every time we were about to have an accomplishment, the Russians beat us to it. So finally, Kennedy went to Johnson, Vice President, then Vice President Johnson, and said, what can we do to clearly dominate the space race? And so Johnson went and conferred with the space experts, and they decided that, you know what, we don't know exactly how we would do it, but we do have a vision for putting a man on the moon. And if we could put a human being on the moon and bring him home again safely, we will have won. It's a giant leap from where we are today. It's not an incremental accomplishment. It's a huge leap. We're pretty sure we can get it done. And so Kennedy was willing to stand up in front of the world and say to everyone, we are going to put a man on the moon. So this was Kennedy's moonshot, which is, of course, where the expression comes from. So that's an example of what NASA did, but we also see this, of course, across industry. With Amazon, Jeff Bezos said, okay, now this is in the early days of Amazon. The first, he saw this opportunity with the internet and he said, you know what? I can't be all things to all people yet, even though that's my vision. But for now, I'm going to start with books. So he had a beachhead market defined around books. And then he actually made a list at first. He said, what are all the different things you can sell on the internet? And then he narrowed it down and had a set of criteria that he used to arrive at books as his first one. And then he expanded from there to CDs and videos. And then he expanded to gifts. And then he expanded to everything. With Apple, if you look at, let's say iTunes, Steve Jobs saw a problem in the market that the music companies were losing their shirts because of peer-to-peer sharing and basically stolen music online. And he had a vision for how you could solve that problem and came up with the iTunes concept. Not him alone, but Apple did. And then Walt Disney is a good example. I think it was in the 50s, he said, I hate the fact that I can't take my kids to amusement parks because they're so seedy. They're nasty. They're disgusting. The people there, I don't want my children around them. I want to create a joyful place. I want to create the happiest place on earth. And I want it to be a place that people are comfortable bringing their families to. And that's when he created Walt Disney World. So he had this vision revolving around a market problem that he wanted to take ownership for and solve. So what I'd like to do now is send you guys into breakout groups. And let's have you talk about, just share with each other some of the big competitive challenges your company is facing, and then what aspects of the launch phase particularly resonated with you. Either your company is already doing that and doing a really good job of it, or maybe your company isn't doing a great job of it. It focuses its message purely around the product and not really a grander vision for the market and where it would like to take the market. So let's just break out, and then if Tom is able to give me hosting duties here after you're in your rooms, I'll pop in and out of different rooms and just participate with the conversation, participate in the conversation.
All right, so we're going to give this a try. If for any reason that somebody is stuck in a room and they're the only ones there or something along those lines, feel free to use the chat window, and you can shoot messages to me directly, or just to everyone. I'll keep an eye on the chat window in case somebody gets stranded. So hopefully you all have interesting conversations. How much time are we going to give this?
We're going to just about 15 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes shy of that. I'll send you a warning before we're going to pop out.
Okay, so there should be roughly 7 or 8 of you in each one of the rooms, and we're going to send you off in there. Like I say, you know how to get a hold of me if there's an issue. So, and I'll try and migrate around things as well. So we'll see you all in 12, 13, 14 minutes, somewhere thereabouts. And here we go. Let's see, did we want to put in a anything into the messaging all the rooms? I can type in a specific question to kind of.
Yeah, you could just, the question is, there are 2 questions. What are the biggest competitive challenges your company is facing or will face? So what are the biggest competitive challenges your company is facing or will face? And then the other question, what aspects of the launch phase particularly resonated with you?
Okay, I'll have to keep track of time here.
Yeah, I've got my timer set.
Okay.
So if you want to make me host.
All right. Let's see. We got 1, Deborah Sheets in there, and 2, we got Alok and Jim Shibler and Nayla, room 3. Just looking to see, we got John Lang, who's one of our board members, and then room 4.
And then when the other folks,
and we have you listed as room 4, but we will.
Yeah. And Anmin, Mihir, Neil, and Salim, when they come back to their computers, I can put them in a room.
Okay, and I just made you host, so there we go.
Great. Okay, and what room do you want to be in? Do you have a preference?
Spin the dice.
Okay. Let's see. Hi, Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm Theresa. I've been presenting, and everybody's in breakout rooms right now.
Nice.
So I'm going to assign you to a room, and we're talking about 2 questions, one of which won't make a lot of sense to you at this point. But one is, what are some of the biggest competitive challenges your company is facing or will face in the future? And then the other question is, I just talked about what it means to the first phase of the methodology that I'm sharing with you guys tonight. It's the launch phase, and it has to do with deciding what your company moonshot is going to be, meaning what problem do you want to take ownership for in the marketplace, so that you have a vision around that problem and a point of view around that problem and what needs to be done about it, and then your unique approach. And so what everybody's talking about is also what parts of that launch phase that I discussed resonated with them. Either their
Awesome.
company is doing it well or their company needs to do it. So that part you might just listen in on. So,
And are you, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you able to leave me in without a breakout room? Because I'm actually helping SVPMA with registration, and I got started a little bit late with some technical difficulties on my end. So I was supposed to just be checking in people on our registration list.
oh, sure, you can stay out of a breakout room. Yeah, I didn't realize you
Okay.
were part of the now I've got you in two places here. Are you?
Yeah, my Mac Mini does not have a camera, so I'm using the audio from my phone, and I keep one screen on so I can do the registration.
Okay, got it.
All right, I'm going to put myself back on mute, and I'll just go ahead and register people as I see them.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Liz, I'm going to pop in and out of some of the breakout rooms, so you'll see me come and go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And shoot me a text message, a private message, if there's somebody, if I need to pop out to take care of, to get somebody into a breakout room.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
All right. Well, maybe I won't. It's not letting me do it for some reason.
Theresa, this is Liz again. So are there a few people that also are not in breakout rooms, or am I seeing a breakout room?
No, they have stepped away from their computers, I think.
Got it. Okay.
Those of you still with me, speak up if you are back. I think they've stepped away from their computers.
Okay. So they're doing a separate breakout in their room, and then when they're done doing that exercise, they're leaving it and then coming back.
Yes. So
Oh,
I'll bring
nice.
everybody back together.
Awesome. That's a really, I like that concept.
Yeah. Hi, John. Everybody is out in breakout rooms and they're just coming back together. So your timing is perfect.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the breakout room should be closing up in a second. 10 more seconds. We'll have everybody back together. Okay. So I'm going to give control back to Tom. And so everybody, tell me, share a little bit about what you talked about. Just open up your microphones if anybody wants to speak up, or you can raise your hand. But does anybody want to summarize what happened in your breakout room?
Yeah, sure, I will. I had Wen and Jean and Dan and Yael and a couple other folks were there too. We definitely talked about the challenges of differentiation and the various stages that that they're at. Jean was working in a stealth mode project, so that's always, you know, the big challenge of finding that charter customer to really, you know, help be your partner and walking in that, you know, journey of uncertainty. So that was great to hear. And then when specifically a very emotionally challenging and charged issue in decision support systems for organ transplants, and building a case for that, and spend a little time talking about how to really differentiate yourself. And my suggestion was around building out the narrative and the story to really get connected to the customers, and through that being able to build more support through her stakeholders to get more investment to build it out to really take it to market.
Okay. Yeah, and when I think a lot of what we're going to talk about the rest of this evening will also be helpful for you. Would anybody else like to quickly summarize what happened in their room before we continue? No takers? Are you guys being shy? Come on, Jean.
I'll offer actually someone else's story.
Okay, Steve.
And that is we started hearing the beginning of an account that this company was actually introducing a new product to sort of change the way things were done in a certain industry, but that actually by itself introduced challenges in bringing those customers along to the new idea. So it was sort of right in line with the point of differentiating yourselves and having a different opinion, but then becomes a challenge of bringing the customers across, bringing the market with you.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's carry on. I will share my screen here again. Everybody can see that? Okay. So the next phase, and Jim said, oh, but you ignite before you launch. And yes, a lot of you, of course, you ignite a rocket, you light it and it sends it up. But as we also know with rockets, you have to continuously ignite in order to reach escape velocity and get out of the gravitational pull of the Earth. And we experience this, of course, with companies too, especially with a startup or a new offering you're trying to get off the ground. Reaching that escape velocity is so challenging. And this phase is actually a big weakness in a lot of companies. So they do PR or they do content marketing. And what they really do is just throw stuff at the wall to see what's going to stick. And with the ignite phase, I actually get into it in quite a bit of detail in the book, because there are some very specific strategies around this that are different from the way most companies approach it with their PR or with any of their efforts to try to generate momentum in the marketplace and get their message out there. But with this phase, you're really, especially in the beginning, when you're just trying to get going, a key part of it is getting influencers and rallying influencers around your point of view and also your approach. And the key, of course, is to try to build some market momentum that's bigger than you. So your goal with this phase is to become an industry player, become part of the fabric of the industry. And you start out by trying to convert influencers to your point of view. And a lot of times you're not even necessarily talking about your solution right away. You're initially focused very much on your point of view about what needs to happen out there, and you're trying to propagate that point of view and convert innovators. So those first charter customers you mentioned, Cam, that's part of that is about getting some of those early innovator types. If you are familiar with Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey Moore talks about basically it's the innovation adoption curve. And interestingly, that originates back to the 1920s and 30s with trying to understand how farmers, what was the pattern for how farmers adopted new agricultural techniques and technology. And that got studied over the decades and codified into an academic piece and a book in early 1960s by Everett Rogers called Diffusion of Innovations. And it's a process by which you watch your market adopt new technology, and there's a very specific pattern to it. It follows a bell curve, and you've heard people refer to innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, etc. I talk about this in the book because it's an important concept to understand for the ignite phase, not just for getting customers, but also for getting influencers to embrace what it is you're talking about. So one key concept is that in every industry, I'm just going to give you a couple of little snippets from the methodology. These are just small examples of specific strategies within it. But every industry, every space you guys are in has a handful of power brokers. So we're not talking about social media influencers. We're not talking about necessarily always the well-known bloggers, although they can be in this category, but there's usually just a handful of power brokers who know everybody. Everybody knows them. They are the shakers and the movers in that industry, and they are key in setting the agenda. And underneath that individual is this broad, complex network. There's one person I know that I think of, he has the most diverse network I've ever seen. He's not in Silicon Valley, he's not even in tech, but he's got tentacles into every tech company. He can pick up the phone and get anybody on the phone he wants. And if somebody like him knows and understands your point of view and where you think things need to go and starts evangelizing that on your behalf, you're in. So that's an example of one of the strategies you can use in the Ignite phase. Another one is to understand the media and influencer food chain. And it maps to the innovation adoption curve, that bell curve that I just described. And by understanding in your space the media food chain, you can work your way up the food chain. So you start out with, usually it's very, very niche oriented, geeky blogs and events and so forth. And the next bigger category of media and events and influencers watches what these guys are writing about and talking about, and then they start writing and talking about it. And then the bigger ones, the big news publications, the big vertical trade publications, et cetera, are watching what these guys are talking about, and then they start writing and covering and talking about it. So if you try to enter a space and go right for the big guys, a lot of times you're going to fall flat. But if you work your way up the media food chain, you have a sustainable, meaningful role and influence in the in your space and in getting your point of view out there and getting it adopted by other people. So believe it or not, the Apollo space program did this. And in fact, they did so much of it that these two authors wrote an entire book about it. It's actually very fascinating. And if you have any interest in the topic, I definitely recommend it. They've got lots of fascinating stories. They did a tremendous amount of primary research by interviewing different participants in the space program. And one of the things that the space program said is, okay, our key power brokers are going to be the three networks. Now, at the time, these were, that there wasn't cable TV at that time. So they got the three networks on board with what they were trying to do, and they educated the networks and provided them all kinds of detailed materials, gave them scale models. This is Walter Cronkite explaining on TV how the lunar landing module was going to work, and published all this detail. This news reference, for example, had over 200 pages of detailed information and drawings. And even though the Russians were trying to beat us to the moon, they published all of this into the public realm, gave it freely to the press so they could understand what was going on and so that they could explain it to the public. They also allowed the astronauts to be covered on a personal level in Life magazine, which was the biggest public interest magazine at the time. And if you think of some of the luminaries out there in business where the public takes an interest in their personal lives, this was an analogy in the space program times. And so people fell in love with the astronauts. The astronauts became the spokespeople for the program. And the better they got to know the astronauts, the more they felt close to them and followed them. We see this strategy used by companies like Mark Benioff used it with Salesforce, getting out there and talking about the end of software. That's how he started his company. He said software needs to die. He didn't even talk about his offering. To Steve Jobs, when they were working on iTunes, he went around and met with all the major music companies, major power brokers in the music space. I tell some of these stories in the book. Really fascinating, some of the conversations that he had. And he got them on board with iTunes and got them to embrace it and support it so that when they rolled it out, they had the music companies behind them. And then we know how Elon Musk gets out there with his points of view on what's happening with the environment or in space or whatever, whichever of his businesses he's talking about. So this is a really critical strategy, and it's one that a lot of companies get wrong. So you want to make sure you have that point of view, and it's not your product that people are going to care about or want to hear about. They want to hear about the point of view and where the market's going and what's happening that's bigger than your offering. And then often the natural conversation will take things to, what it is you're doing and what's special about what you're doing. The next phase is navigate. By the way, just to get back to the comment about most rockets, ignition happens first. With Ignite, I'm trying to back up here. With Ignite, you have to continuously ignite, just like with a rocket. So you have to continuously stay out there in front of the market with your point of view and what it is you're doing. Navigate is where we have to walk the talk. So this is where you deliver on the promises by guiding customers along the journey to achieving the results that you talk about with your offering. And this is where you actually develop your product and you're really a solution, and you implement it with the right customers and you deliver actual outcomes. So you have to, first of all, in defining what it is your product is going to do, the holy grail is if you get customers, and this came from a board member I once reported to when I was CMO for a company. He said, look, I want you guys to have an offering that makes people say, holy we have to have that. He said, that's the emotional reaction I want from your customers. And when I tell people what it is you guys are doing, that's what I want the response to be. So this is really what you're trying to aim for. So you deliver on your promises, and the key here is providing a complete solution, not just functions and features. You want to define something that's going to deliver results. And then as you get traction in the marketplace, another thing you're doing in the background is building your community of believers, because they're going to be apostles out there or disciples out there in the marketplace, touting what it is you're doing and talking about it. Again, not just your product, but the purpose and the mission, the higher purpose behind what it is you're out to accomplish. So with the Apollo space program, of course, they had all these numerous missions that led up to Apollo 11 that actually put somebody on the moon. But there were all kinds of pieces that had to come together. The total solution, they weren't just offering a product or a service in the form of a rocket or spacesuits for that matter. The result was what they focused on. We're putting a man on the moon and getting him home. And the way we go about in doing that, they talked about it for credibility purposes, but that's not as much what people were interested in. They were all hanging on, oh my God, are they going to get somebody to the moon or not? And with each mission they did, people were tracking, oh, wow, are they going to get to that next important step that gets us closer to putting someone on the moon? So they had to figure out, what are these people what are they going to wear? How are they going to eat? How are they going to use the bathroom in space? They had to train them to be geologists so that once they got to the moon, they could collect rock samples. There was a lot involved in making this happen. And of course, with companies, we see this in action. Let's take Amazon. Now, I know a lot of you might think of Amazon as the place where you go on and order your goods or services or what you're buying online. But they make a ton of their money from the merchants who are using them to market to customers, to provide visibility and distribution for their products, and to provide fulfillment services. So they take a good 40-ish% margin or fee off of what the merchant is getting just to do some of those services. And actually, sometimes it's even higher than that. So Amazon provides a complete solution for somebody who wants to sell on the Amazon platform. And when Apple introduced the iPhone, they didn't just deliver a phone. They had a carrier lined up. AT&T was the exclusive carrier. They had apps built and sitting on that phone. And so you weren't just buying a phone, you were building you were buying a computer for your pocket and a total experience. So, an example that I love when it comes to a community of believers is Harley Davidson. they have the Harley Owners Group. Now, any of us with software backgrounds, of course, there have been for decades software user groups, and communities are becoming more popular now. But what I love about the Harley Davidson story is that in the 80s, they were in trouble. They were really struggling, and they decided with just 50 people to start the Harley Owners Group. And now there are over 1 million members. And these people are fervent Harley Davidson lovers. They have rallies together. They have relationships with each other out there. They have meetups. They have events. They have different chapters around the world. So it's almost taken on a life of its own. And it's been very powerful. I think the average Harley Owners Group member spends something like 40% more than the average Harley Davidson customer. So that community of believers in the Harley Davidson lifestyle, they don't just sell motorcycles, they sell a whole identity, a personal identity and lifestyle. And that's been very powerful for them. And then the last phase is the accelerate phase. So naturally, the world around us changes constantly. COVID is a perfect example. And with Accelerate, after you've got traction in the marketplace, number one, even if you started out completely uniquely, there are going to be Me Too's that come along and copy you, and you have to stay ahead of them and accelerate out past ahead of them. And you need to adjust to market changes. So the key here is watching your back. So what you want to do is build more loyalty with your customers, constantly monitor the market, and then stay ahead of the competition. And the Apollo space program did that, of course, by following the Apollo space mission with multiple other missions. They didn't stop at the one goal. They had to continually adapt and adjust. And of course, as markets fill up, another thing we see happen is they subdivide. So you may have once been dominant in one space, but now that space has subdivided and there are other dominant players that are more specialized than you, and it can cause problems in your market position. So of course, we can name endless companies that are constantly adapting and adjusting and may face challenges in the future. Netflix has changed a lot since it first came out, but of course it has enormous streaming competition now. It'll be interesting to see if it can maintain its position. So
but you look at Microsoft just as another example of how they've gone from Windows desktop software to now that an afterthought. It's all about Azure and cloud services.
That's right. That's right. And look at what Apple did, what it did for Apple when Steve Jobs finally relented and they embraced allowing working with Microsoft and putting Office on the Mac. It opened up unbelievable opportunities for them to expand their presence among business users, which had been a real problem for them. So what I want to do now is have you guys break out and just talk about whether any aspects of any of these Ignite, Navigate, or Accelerate phases particularly resonated, and what one concept you think might make a difference for your company right away, if there was just one concept. Now, I have a lot of details in the book that are very specific, and it's very prescriptive. And so with the book, you'll get more ideas, but we'll just have a quick 10-minute conversation, 10, 15 minutes to have you guys share, and then we'll come back out and compare notes. And Tom, if you cannot assign me to a breakout room, I wasn't able to pop in and out because somehow I had been put in one, and then I declined it and I couldn't get back in. So Tom's going to put you in breakout rooms, and then hopefully I can jump in and be a fly on the wall. And yeah, Jim, it's amazing the loyalty that Harley Davidson has engendered with its customer base. It's just incredible. In fact, while we wait for the breakout rooms to come together, why don't you guys, if you can pop in any other examples that come to mind of companies that have done some of these things I've talked about in the chat. I know Cirque du Soleil was mentioned earlier in the chat, and that's a great example of a company that reinvented the crowded circus space. Created a whole unique, had a whole unique point of view around what circuses should be, and created a very unique offering for people. Tom, is it working? Can we get everybody into breakout rooms?
Well, it helps when I'm not on mute.
Show me unmuted. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, so currently there's 4 rooms. There's not an option to have somebody not in a room. So I think it has you currently assigned to room 4, but I don't have a way of saying leave you out of any room.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead and send everybody off to their rooms, and I will hold off until you give me host control.
Okay, all right, we'll give this a shot and see what happens.
Okay.
And host. So I've handed you host.
All right.
What I don't see is it didn't invite me to a room yet.
Yeah, I'll assign you to one.
Okay. I think the host it leaves out of that by default, and that's what one of the things is. So.
Oh, okay.
All right, I will jump into room 4 and we'll see you in 15 minutes or so.
Okay. Oops, I think I just assigned.
The just as a quick thing, I was finding that people didn't necessarily get a good screenshot of the questions, and so if you, when you join a room, if you could help jumpstart folks, that's good. Or if there's a way
I'll
to send
type them into the chat here.
Yeah, that would be helpful. All right, we'll see you on the other side.
Hi, Ed. You want to unmute?
Okay, there we go.
There you go. So everybody's in breakout rooms for the next few minutes. In fact, let me
Okay.
set my timer so I don't lose track here. And were you in the presentation and then dropped out, or are you just able to join us now?
I was doing work and I barely.
Okay.
I'm just catching up now, so I'll catch what I can catch.
Sure. So I'll put you in a breakout room and you can just participate in the conversation or listen to what others are saying.
Okay, I'll just listen. Okay, just
Okay.
tell me what to do.
Okay. And then the questions that they're talking about are in the chat, and but they won't make a lot of sense to you. But,
Okay.
You can just join in. Okay.
Thank you.
There you go. Is anybody here with me right now besides besides Liz? Alok, are you there? Mihir? Shalene? Anybody with me? Oh, Alok, you said you don't have a microphone. But I am getting your chats, your messages in the chat. I'm so sorry you can't participate in these breakout rooms. Hi, Rajesh. Did I say that right?
Yeah, you got it right.
Oh, good.
Absolutely. Yeah, I accidentally exited the break room, but
Well, they're closing automatically in 30 seconds anyway.
okay. Well, I was in the middle of something, but I guess
Oh no!
we'll
Talking?
continue.
Were you
No,
talking?
I was talking actually. I was trying to explain the challenge that while a lot of the examples are tied around software business, right? In our group that we were talking about, I was talking about like how the same challenge of innovate or ignite you face is different when you have a lot of physical products, right? So in robotics, and once you have had deployed hardware, how do you go about adding more functionality and really relying on adding more software functionality? Because once you develop a hardware platform, it's hard to go about it iteratively, keep on improving the design.
Once the hardware is set in stone, it's set in stone. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not really set in stone as the development cycles are much longer, right? Even if you want to make a small minor tweak and change the physical form factor of a robot, you're looking at least 9 months to 15 months, right?
But you know, these principles really do apply to both kinds of companies, and I have examples of you know, all kinds of different companies and industries in the book. And it's interesting because I first developed the methodology mostly for IT services companies, because it's so hard to differentiate when you're a service. Nobody can see the differences. But over the years, what was fascinating is the problems started seeping into other industries like software and consumer products and you know, technology and non-technology, to the point where I ended up broadening the application of it to, you know, cross industry. And you see that in the book with the different case studies that are in there, because the problems are pretty fundamentally the same regardless. So but we could get into a discussion if you wanted to offline. I'd be happy to talk to you about how, you know, how you could apply some of the concepts. Of course, if you get the book, you know, I think it'll be pretty apparent. So, but I'm happy to have a conversation as well.
Sure.
So, oh, I need to make Tom the host again. Let me do that. And then I want to hear what you guys talked about. Again, for some reason, I wasn't allowed to get in and out of the rooms. So I just want to, before we move into a quick Q&A, I just wanted to hear some of what you guys talked about.
This is Cam, and in our group, Dan gave us a lot of the background of Pandora's journey from being a, you know, consumer music app and streaming service to a point where they definitely followed the journey and got into the accelerate phase, and now they're the leading audio ad platform. And so they actually have, a much bigger and more robust business, and very differentiated business as a go-to, to selling all the inventory of any of the other audio streaming services.
Hmm.
So that was great.
Pretty fascinating. Yeah. Who else? Yeah, Jim.
In room 2, we were spending both sessions mostly on Bhavesh's challenge. He's about to launch a training course, and he's not sure he's going to get as much visibility and as much prime position as he wants compared to your lower tier things, your $99 courses. So he's got a computer security related course. So we did a lot of talking about finding the thought leaders, making sure that they start talking this up, selling the vision rather than selling the product, until they start echoing that vision, and also finding ways to get third-party validation of the value.
And maybe also turning it into a more of a robust solution as opposed to just a generic training course. I don't know a lot about the offering you were discussing, but
well, one of the main differentiators is he has hands-on, so they actually get in and do exercises that troubleshoot problems, etc. So that's a differentiator from the cheapy courses.
Right.
And so we were trying to exploit that in certification, and pointing out that you invest in this and here's what you get out of it, show the ROI, etc.
Yeah.
But a lot around the thought leader stuff.
Super. Anybody else real fast? No? So does anybody have any questions? I know, Jim, you mentioned earlier in the chat the fact that net profits are big, are super critical. And yes, absolutely. The challenge is that without enough gross margins, you don't have any discretionary spending. Your net profits are what are left over after you've made your gross margins and then decided what you're going to spend on sales and marketing and office space and legal services and accounting and all that other stuff. And without those healthy gross margins, your net profits get squeezed to basically nothing if you're not careful. So, and the key is costs are always going to rise, no matter how much great scale you manage to get and how much efficiency you manage to get. Your costs are always going to rise. So the key is trying to figure out ways to increase those gross margins over time, which is why we put such an emphasis on trying to find a way to justify higher prices through higher value and through that brand recognition.
Yeah, you need to monitor both, clearly.
So does anybody have any questions about what I've walked through at a high level? Obviously, I'm just skimming the surface here, but just conceptually, any questions or concerns?
Alok was asking again about market share.
Oh, right. And he doesn't have a microphone. Yeah, well, market share is important. I think what happens is too many people get fixated on trying to capture market share defined in the wrong way. So they define market share in this big, broad sense. And it's not actually always in your best interest to go after that broad market. In fact, a lot of times narrowing down and focusing more, especially as the market becomes more crowded, the more focused you are, the better off you're going to be. And it's more about, I really don't put that much emphasis on market share. Now, if you're trying to, win over the platform wars or something like that, it might be a different story. But what we're really focused here on is owning the problem in the minds of the marketplace and being known as the most effective solution to that problem. And market share will happen over time, but there are customers you don't even necessarily want because they're not necessarily interested in paying healthier prices and going for value. And so your profits and your growth aren't necessarily going to be, aren't always going to benefit from that higher market share if it's a higher share of a group of customers that are only interested in paying the lowest price and are, just hunting based on functions and features as opposed to being interested in actually achieving business outcomes. So there's a bit of a distinction. I think too often companies get overly fixated on monitoring what the competition's doing and trying to match and equal what the competition's doing and trying to monitor market share. And market share is a very fuzzy thing to try to capture and measure anyway. And you're going to be better off really focusing on how to provide that leadership in the market and provide that very robust solution. Anybody else? Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'll just ask this out loud. I think I'm curious about your thoughts about this methodology and differentiation in general for products entering markets that are new, sort of disruptive markets. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's, in some ways it's perfect for this because first of all, the methodology I laid out, there's a sequence to it, but you don't have to follow that sequence. So, most companies are going to come into it with some existing components across each of the 4 phases. And you may do pieces of navigate while you're doing pieces of ignite, or you may be doing bits and pieces across the board, or you may do it sequentially from start to finish. It really just depends. The key is doing all 4 eventually. The companies that don't do well, that don't sustain themselves, have only done 1 or 2 or 3, but not all 4. So that's critical. But for a startup, what's perfect about this is that you get out there with this problem that you're focused on and this vision for where you think it needs to go. And a lot of times you're getting the market to try to work with you on defining what that solution should look like and what that solution should be. And you're getting input and they're helping to shape it. So what's nice about the methodology, the way I've laid it out sequentially, is that you're getting that feedback as you go before you've actually even necessarily started building something. And that's actually consistent with some of the other like lean startup and customer development methodology and so forth. But you're putting a vision out there in the market and you're bringing people along with you as you develop it. Tesla did this because the founders, they basically said, okay, electric car technology has been around for over 100 years and it has not taken off. And, what we need to do is make electric cars sexy. And how do you do that? First of all, what are the problems? Why don't people want electric cars? They don't think they're strong enough. They don't have power. And they're just for crunchy granola types. And so they said, all right, what does it take to make an electric car get over those humps? We're going to make it sexy. We're going to make it a sports car. And they went about, doing something very disruptive. And they prototyped it and they got those early influencers on board with the Roadster. And the Roadster was their innovator product. And they never intended that the whole company was going to hinge on the Roadster long term. They always had a vision that they wanted to go mass market, but they used that Roadster to kind of get people on board and see that electric cars can be powerful. And so that's an example of how they put some of this methodology to use. I didn't work with them, but they're an example of this in action, doing something disruptive. And there are lots of examples out there. So it's very applicable.
There's a great video for folks who haven't seen it from the Product Leaders Summit. I'll put a link in the chat, which is Mark Tarpenning, one of the founders of Tesla. Most people think of Elon as a founder. He was not. Yeah. He was like a board member and later on became CEO, talking through this entire evolution of their thinking. And it's fascinating. It shows you really how they structured their thinking.
Are you talking about the Martin Eberhart talk to the Stanford Technology Ventures program at Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders Summit?
No. This is Mark Tarpenning speaking to the Product Leader Summit. So Spiro
Okay.
Ventures and a bunch of others, Omidyar Network put something on about 2
Okay.
or so years ago. I'll put it in a second.
Because there's another great talk from 2000, I think it's 2007. We had Martin Eberhardt, one of the founders, come talk to one of our, it was actually during Entrepreneurship Week at Stanford. And he laid out the whole story, and it's really, really fascinating. And he was in the middle of it at that time, so he was sharing with us some of the mistakes and problems they were running into and the unexpected obstacles. So that's another good one. I think if you go to, there's a wonderful resource website called ecorner.stanford.edu. I'll type it into the chat here if I can. It's ecorner.stanford.edu, and it's Martin Eberhardt. I think roughly 2007. So great story and really fun talk, really fascinating. Any other questions?
Jim's got one.
It's more a comment. You showed some of the MarTech landscape, and the April 2018s. They published another one in April 2020, and they went from 6829 in April 2018 to now 8,000. And they've taken that map and now they've broken it up into a bunch of little islands, and
Yeah.
you can't read anything on there because
Exactly.
they're so you might want to go get the latest version of that one. It's getting even crazier.
Wow. Your talk about kind of getting the influencers on board reminded me. I was at a meeting, and this is years ago, and Hewlett Packard was trying to figure out how to tap into influencers and who they viewed as the influencers, and they wanted to get, their goal was to they built a customer panel. They gave it some fancy name, and they populated it with musicians, fashion designers from New York, musicians from LA, and they were tapping different areas of the country, and they had some in from Europe and Asia as well. But they were specifically picking up people who were viewed as leading edge in pop culture, so that they could see how their product served kind of these influencers as a whole, but also how that aligned with, if they got comments back, well, this thing is ugly because the next year's color is going to be blue. That was valuable input for them to get 6 to 9 months before anybody else did. So I thought that was an interesting technique of getting the influencers inside and working to kind of steer the product. Yeah.
And those are your innovator customers that actually help you shape things and give you the feedback. They're the ones that are willing to deal with some of the sloppiness because they want to be first. They've been the ones waiting. It's the "where have you been all of my life" reaction to to a new offering. And with Ignite, it's not the regular social media influencers you're after unless they are powerful evangelists in the market. If you just have somebody do a post for you or a blog post or whatever it may be, depending on your space, that's just going to be a flash in the pan. What you're trying to do with Ignite is build a rolling thunder effect for your message and your offering out there in the market. So I see we only have a couple of minutes, and I was just going to wrap up by just reiterating that we have these 4 stages. They're absolutely critical. I've spent a lot of time trying to poke holes in this and get people to find the weaknesses and see what I was missing. And I made sure this was robust. I tried it out over the years, going inside companies and implementing it and working with clients. And I really think the recipe of what companies need to do to establish that kind of leading market position. And it's also one thing that I really emphasize in the book is, you've got to just take action. Like, don't overthink it. Don't try to be too perfect. I have worksheets at the end of each chapter just to help you get a start. And then at the end, we put it all together in a 1-page worksheet. This stuff's available on the website as well. All the graphics in the book are available on the website. And, it really walks you through step by step. You don't need me, as I said, but I really feel passionate about how important this is for helping companies sustain their success over the long run, to become successful in a crowded space and then sustain it. So, it put a man on the moon, and it can definitely help your business, these 4 phases and what goes on inside each one. And here's the book. If you want to go out and get it on Amazon, it's also available on other online retailers. And with the pandemic, I don't know how much physical bookstore distribution it has at this point, but it's certainly available in, hardcover, soft paperback, and ebook format.
Bezos put them all out of business.
And then you can get it, as on the Nook and iBook and all that kind of stuff. And if you want to get in touch with me, here's my contact info. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and just tell me you were at this presentation, and we can connect there. And I'm happy to answer any questions after this. And certainly feel free to be in touch with me.